So we're number one, and the next year, after I agreed to accept $1 million of the deficit, I'm invited into New York to meet, the top executives. The show is number one, and General Motors is ecstatic about it. And we get Dan Blocker to, kick a car, and say, this is my kind, this is a man's kind of truck, And Dinah Shore couldn't do that, so now they were selling trucks, So we go into New York, my wife and I have lunch with a number of the executives at 21, and they have a speaker for the day, a guy named Marshall McLuhan, who is the great guru of television, Professor McLuhan from the, I think, University of Toronto, Canada. And he was the man who came up with the medium is the message, and some of the great, great early statements. I mean, he was a brilliant, brilliant man. And I'm in there, sitting at a table with some of the NBC people. And McLuhan talks about television, its impact on the world and everything else. And he comes up, he said, there's some giant steps in, the introduction of television and all that. He said, one of the great giant steps was due to the man who fought for introduced color into television. He says, because color adds an additional dimension. He points out color has an emotion, there's an emotional response to color. He went on and that. So they go up, and after the talk is over, they go up to McLuhan and tell him that man you were talking about is right in this room. And the great Professor Marshall McLuhan, the guru, a very distinguished man with a close cropped white beard and all that, rushes up to me like a schoolboy and shakes. He said, "Are you the man? Are you David Dortort?" It had to be one of the great moments of my life. My average working day didn't start too early because I would be working very late the night before. And I'd be working the night before especially on the script that had to be shot starting the next morning, going through it one last time, trying to catch anything that was, particularly in terms of history, that wasn't absolutely accurately true, and correcting that, and making a number of other small corrections, whatever I felt needed to be done, if anything had to be done. But to give myself the feeling that all I could do had been done before I handed over to the director. So I would come in about 9:30, something like that, 9:30, and the show had already, the production had started an hour before. That's when we were shooting here. Because up in Lake Tahoe it was a little different. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And I had my story editor, a wonderful writer named Thomas Thompson, who I brought down from Santa Rosa, California, where he had been a reporter on the Santa Rosa Press Telegram newspaper there. And I read some of his novels, and looking authentic Western material, and he really understood the West, wrote a number of very fine Western books. And he became my story editor, but he was a very gregarious guy, and he was perfect for the actors, because he could BS with them, and he would open the set for me, with the coffee and the donuts and all the other, and find out what the problem was, going in. And after, when I would come in, after the show had been shooting for it started at 8, but starts about 8:30, about an hour, he would say, we have problems with this, we have problems with that. And then if it was a script problem, he and I would sit down and try to solve it. If the actor had trouble with a certain scene, or if it were a problem with the actor's behavior, in terms of the director couldn't handle them, or protesting the director, or the director not liking the attitude of the actor, I was the peacemaker. I'd come down to the set, and this would go on, for about an hour or so. Then I would probably go into dailies. By that time, dailies would be ready about 11 o'clock, let's say, and I check dailies. If anything that had to be brought to the director's attention, I would go down to the set and tell them. And I usually would have lunch with Tommy Thompson, with my production manager. Sometimes, not always, with the director, if he could, usually they wanted to check their work a little more. And that would be from about, let's say about 12:30 to about 1:30. Then the rest of the afternoon, if I didn't have to go into something like music editing, I reserve it for scripts, for writers. That's what I really and truly enjoyed. And writers would come in, I'd see like 2 or 3, and give each of them like an hour, you know, which was a lot of time, because they would come with an idea, and either their knowledge of history was so unbelievably poor. I had one writer writing a script, a fine writer, really a wonderful writer who had some top motion picture credits, and it says these outlaws trying to escape crossed the Northern California border into Canada. So I call him in and say, wait a minute. I said, how did they cross the border from Northern California to Canada? Well, you know, there's a border, and after you leave Northern California, they're in Canada. I said, what happens to Oregon and Washington? Are they there? He said, what difference does it make? He said, nobody knows that. I said, every school child knows that. Anyway, I know it, so it can't be. So they changed the whole story. Then after the last meeting with the last writer, there'd sometimes be another problem on the set. I would do that. I'd go down and take care of that. But then there was always the next day's script. So as I said earlier, I would spend an hour or two just going over it line by line by line, word for word for word, an hour script. And that would take a couple of hours. And then I pack it in and go home. Thereby, wish I could have changed it, depriving my children of any real close relationship with me, which was a tragedy. I didn't realize at the time, but now with maturity, finally, I hope I realize it was a big mistake. But
it's part of the business, though.
Yeah, it's a rough business.
Where did you get your writers from for Bonanza?
Well, a lot of them I knew from being the president of the TV branch. A great many of them had worked with me on Restless Gun. And then there's an organization called the Western Writers of America, which are writers who never, for the most part, have done television motion pictures, but really know the West. And that's what I really cared about. I wanted the truth, you know. At least what they would tell me about in terms of story material was fresh. Then they would need help sometimes, a great deal of help with the script. But either I would help them, or Tommy Thompson and I would help them together, you know. And sometimes, not always, not frequently, because I hated to do that, we'd have to bring another writer in who understood screenplay, you know. Writers would come to me, many of them friends of mine, and they'd have kind of a general thesis, you know, a general idea for a show. And one of the biggest problems with outside writers, or, you know, writers who aren't affiliated with the show, is they take the permanent characters on the show, particularly in a dramatic show, but they're not what they focus on. They focus on outside people who come into the show. And so the focus of the show, if you can follow the somewhat metaphysical argument, the focus of the show is not on the people who carry the show from week to week and whom you're paying to carry the show and who the audiences wants to see, you know. But so you're writing from what I call the outside in, where the way to write is from the inside out. So what I would do, and that also sounds simple enough, but it's a process. It's a creative process that's sort of difficult to achieve without discipline, without logic, and that is what the rewrite is about. The rewrite, and also to focus it and sharpen it. And I would, you know, then, you know, we'd spend quite a bit of time, because I felt this was all important. The script is where it all begins, and because of my experience doing this hundreds of times, you know, I began to acquire things. This is the way it ought to go, you know. And orally, I would do like the whole structure, because this is how it begins. This is the problem that endangers the whole situation, and here's the solution. In the famous words of Samuel Goldwyn, he said, "Include the audience in, not out." It has to be about the people that you want the audience to respond to. And sometimes you do an entirely internal show. we did a famous show where little Joe meets Julia, the famous, the first madam in Virginia City, and I cast Jane Greer to play it. She was a wonderful, wonderful actress, beautiful actress. But she was much older than little Joe. And little Joe sees her and is infatuated because she's a very sophisticated lady in what is really a mining town, a mining camp, and decides that he falls in love with her. And she responds to him too. He's a very handsome young man and very ardent in his pursuit of her, wants to marry her. Tells that to his father, and his father said, how can you? How can you? And he says, you're not old enough. And he said, I'm old enough. When will I be able to make decisions for myself? When do you make all the decisions for me? How long do I have to endure this, So we get that fine argument within the family that the audience loves too, because they can identify with that. So it's internalizing a situation. Now, some writers come in and, boy, they have it just like that. It's just wonderful, and it's a pleasure. Other writers, it takes a great deal of time, a great deal of patience, a number of rewrites. And sometimes I would rewrite basically an entire script, but I would always keep the original right, because that was where the seed came from. That was the genesis. That's where it began. So it's not fair to take it away from him, because what follows the credit is the money, and I can't do that. I just can't do that. Westerns were pretty grim until that time, but we thought people like to laugh, and we're talking about a family. They don't always live on the thin edge of tension. Sometimes they enjoy each other. Sometimes they have fun. They kid each other and they tease each other. And I began to see the acting on the set. There was a relationship between little Joe, Michael Landon, and Haas, Dan Blocker, where they like to horse around a little bit. Not horse, and which Blocker once did a thing. An actress comes on the show, in the show, and she'd be, oh, horse, I'm happy to meet. Not horse, ma'am, Haas. Well, that's what I said, horse. No, not horse. And, the audience laughed. And I looked at them, I said, they're kind of a Laurel and Hardy in a way, So we would encourage comedy. NBC hated the idea. How dare you even try to do comedy on a Western, People won't know what it is. I said, people will love it. But even more important, possibly, if anything is more important, the actors will love it. It gives them a change of pace every once in a while. And they loved it. Lorne Greene loved it. Even Purnell, the times when Purnell was happiest when he was doing comedy. Purnell is a brooding sort. He's also vastly intelligent. He's very, he's a true intellectual. He really is. And, I would enjoy sparring with him on that level, too. It was wonderful. But the problem was, if the material he felt didn't challenge him, and who knows, who ever knew in advance what would challenge him or not challenge him? Either he would like it or he wouldn't like it, He would kind of walk through it and say, oh, God, And that's finally what led to his leaving the show. After 6 years of enduring the show, am I enduring his problems, and trying to explain to him, Purnell, we're not playing to an audience of 7 or 8 people, like your friends who tell you you're too good for the show. You're not, because as an actor, you must always try to do the very best that you are capable of, not walk through something because you don't feel it's a challenge. He would actually be sort of boorish at times. And, that weighed on the patience of a lot of people, including, the crew, and even to the point where he wouldn't cooperate with the network when they asked for certain things, like personal appearances on some of the talk shows. Or most importantly, he would never cooperate with the sponsor, even though they gave him a beautiful van, anything he wanted. But he felt he was above all that. And so he finally said, after 6 years, he had a year to go, but he wants out. And I said, Purnell, you're making a big mistake, because if you stay with the show, we're doing so well, and we're increasing salaries each year by giant leaps, you know. Stay with the show as long, I don't know how long it'll last, but stay with it, and after that time you can do anything you like. He wanted to get back to the theater. I said, you can do anything, you know. You'll be financially independent. No, he couldn't do that. So he left, and the tragedy is that he never really did very much at all after that. But I knew, and people had told me, like the last couple of years, get rid of him, he's a troublemaker. I said no, because I started with his father and 3 sons, and this son in particular, a lot of women really related to him because they felt, oh, well, he may be difficult and brooding, but they knew how to take care of it. They could take care of his problem, whatever that problem was. It's very hard to deal with success, and the problem with it is hubris. Once you begin to think that you can do no wrong, that's when you do start doing it wrong. Once you believe that you're infallible, you know, pride cometh before the fall. It sure does. And here I was riding high. I had 2 top shows in prime time. And I thought I was pretty good, and I imagine to some extent I was. But more particularly in Bonanza, because High Chaparral, I had the cast which was getting better and better all the time. And it was the first show that did something to improve, let's say, the Latina image. And we had a role model for young Latinos and Latinas to follow, young boys and young girls. One of respectability, one of pride in their ethnicity, in their background, their heritage. But in Bonanza, remember, 2 things happened. First, Pennell left, and I had to reconceive the show from a father and 3 sons to a father and 2 sons. And I tried to bring other actors in to replace Pennell, but they didn't have the same magic. You know, they weren't there from the beginning. They didn't have that development that he had as an actor playing the part.
Yeah,
and the second thing, of course, was the death of Dan Blocker.
Right.
When Dan died, I had 2 left. And in a way, great as Lorne Greene and Michael Landon were, and they were wonderful. But the heart of the show, at least for me, to a great extent, was Big Hoss. I mean, how could I do without that? And I sort of lost interest in the show. And everyone felt the sense of loss so strongly, you know, that I think in a sense, we all began to feel that it was time maybe to let go, you know. So those things, but we had a wonderful run. In the first act, what you try to do is show an attraction between 2 people, or 2 different opposing forces, or 2 strange forces. I mean, 2 people, forces that are unknown to each other. And the attraction holds. And then as some fact about the truth of each of them emerges, or gossip about, or bad-mouthing about them, it dissolves, you know, or is in danger of dissolving. And the second act curtain is, will it work or won't it work? Will he be up to the challenge? Will he have the courage or won't he? And that's the second act curtain. That's the big decision which drives you into the third act. In a comedy, let's say a typical one, where little Joe gets the idea that one day man will be able to fly like the birds, you know. And everyone thinks, oh, come on, little Joe, man will never be able to fly. Well, yes, they will. Well, how? He said, well, if we build the perfect pair of wings, you know. So he said, and so who does he always, who's the gullible guy? Is it Hoss, big Hoss, a big friendly Hoss, who was such a wonderful, the gentle giant, the friend to children, stray animals, wounded creatures of all sorts. And he said, he tells him this great idea. And Hoss said, oh, come on, Joe. He said, with a perfect pair of wings. So they work together and they build this perfect set of wings. And Hoss says, you mean I can fly like a bird with this? Yeah. Well, how will I know? So they find this cliff, this sheer cliff, like 500 feet up, you know, there's a drop. And we move up to that, you know. And Hoss looks down. He says, you sure this is going to work, little Joe? So we said that, you know, the idea man can fly, right? Then we build it. And then the denouement is the second act, where he jumps off the, he's, oh my God, he jumps off the cliff and pow! And then I thought you said men can fly, you know, so we get into the third act. And Little Joe ends by saying, you know, one day, with the right set of wings, man will be able to fly, you know, kind of thing. So we kind of prophesied the age of the airplane kind of thing. Right? In the second act, getting into the essential conflict of the story, with the story of the, you know, the three great stories: man against nature, if there's a problem, like this man can fly, or a forest fire, or an avalanche, or whatever, you know, or man against man, you know, a gunfighter comes into town, how are they going to meet him and take care of him? Or the most important story, man against himself, you know, the internal thing. And that's the conflict. The one with, I tell you about, where little Joe falls in love with an older woman, Julia Bulette, famous Julia Bulette. In addition to being much older, she's, you know, a famous madam. And what is an innocent little kid like him going to do with this kind of a woman? So the father can't, and Joe is furious. How dare you tell me who, you know. And then the denouement in that particular case is Ben Cartwright goes to see Julia Bulette and said, you know, you're a very attractive lady, and I can see why my son falls in love with you. How could any man resist you? But I ask you to consider, he's just a young boy. Is this the right thing to do for him? Are you doing the right thing, not only for him, but for yourself? You're a woman who knows so much more of the world than he does. Can you be happy with a young, innocent, anyway? And so she has to make the decision. We go back, she reflects about herself. Then when he comes, she says, who wants to get mad? What, are you crazy? You know? And she is breaking her heart because she sees she really loves the kid, but she doesn't want to destroy him. So that's the denouement, that's the third act. And it's usually the best acting scene for the actor. To me, a script is a living thing. Just like a person is a living thing. You can't outline a child's future 10 years from now, 50 years from now. The child grows based on environmental influences, family, paternal, maternal influences, schoolmates, all the things. So it's unpredictable. To outline a script follows a rigid line which doesn't allow for invention, innovation, or inspiration. And I found, working on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of scripts, that a script changes. A script grows just like a living thing. Very often you find it, surprisingly enough, on this, even though I would do this thing, you know, going over a script carefully before shooting, trouble on the set. The scene doesn't play. And they call me down to the set. And one or other of the actors would say, I'm having trouble with this, you know what I mean? And I read and I say, yeah, you're right. And right there on the set, we start to change it, you know? And I write, how's this? That's a little better, but wait, how's this? You know, right? I get what the point, their instinct, their natural instinct, you know, as a player, as an actor, or an actress sometimes. We had some great actresses on the show, really fine, Mercedes McCambridge, all sorts of people, you know. And they said, the scene doesn't play right, you know. I would listen to them, you know, and I'd be changing the set. Because it's not, you know, I don't believe in rigidity. I believe in as much flexibility as possible, you know.
So spontaneity is
because
the key.
it's not a one-man thing. You know, the writer is all important. Yes, verily that is so. But other people are important too. The director sometimes says, you know, if you want to say this, or you want, do we need all these other lines? Can't we just cut from here to there? And sometimes, you know, absolutely right. To write a screenplay from an original idea, see, people come in with an idea, or sometimes they bring in a few pages, you know, a treatment, or just a note. And I would read that, and I say, okay, we have a deal. Now let's go to work. Sometimes it would take, I would say the shortest period would be about 3 weeks. And sometimes it would take, in some cases, 2 or 3 months. They were struggling, and I would call and say, look, if you have a problem, come in, let's talk it over. And sometimes they would, and we could break through the problem, or hope we broke through it and see what happens, and it didn't quite break through, try it again, you know. So it all consuming in terms of time. And then when I created the High Chaparral, and I had 2 primetime shows, same time.
How did you?
Then I never got home. I used to sleep in the studio. I mean, at a couch. It was awful. You know, you have to keep your level of concentration at a high pitch all the time, because once you let that level of concentration droop even the slightest bit, something goes in that doesn't belong in there, you know? And that's why I would always, after doing everything possible, the night before shooting, I would have this routine of going through the entire script. Maybe I thought I was crazy, you know, because I was working myself to death. I landed in the hospital with a heart problem, you know. But luckily I survived it. You know what the best solution to writer's block is? Just look, don't let the blank page defeat you. Just force yourself to write. And even though you hate what you're writing, if you force yourself to write, sometimes the magic moment happens. All of a sudden, oh, it comes to you. It's like memory. You can't remember something, you know, and you fight it and try to remember it. If you only just calm down and relax, it comes right back in, sometimes, quite often. Same thing with writing. Writer's block is a matter of discipline. Remember I said discipline and logic are 2 things? So for a script to work, it must be absolutely logical. It must make sense in terms of what one thing does leads to another, sensibly and logically. But discipline, you must keep your you must never allow your concentration to flag. You must always be at the highest point you're able to achieve. Now, many people, myself included, would use some artificial means to achieve that. For instance, smoking. And, you know, I used to smoke quite heavily, particularly in moments like that. I said, where should this scene in all logic be going? Why is it not going that way? How do we make it go that way? Until one day I look at the ashtray, there are like 12 half-lit cigarettes there. I said, this is stupid. Why am I smoking? So I stopped. The other thing is alcohol, because sometimes that does relax you. But the problem with that, one link leads to another drink, and then you can't concentrate at all, you know. Then you have to drive home late at night and you're looped, so you don't want to do that. Thank God I never got into drugs, which many people do for that very same reason. You know, the need for that extra ounce of energy, or hoping that it will come and provide that extra ounce of energy. It does, but as you know, at a cost. Yes, Sinclair Lewis, who said inspiration, 90% of inspiration comes from the seat of the pants, you know, just staying with it. And I knew that I started shooting the next day. I had a director, I had actors, all, you know, I couldn't let them down. I had to keep myself going. And it took a lot out of me. It took a lot out of me. Be meticulous. Respect your audience, no matter who they are. You know, even if it's a comedy, a sitcom, respect the, if you're dealing with, try to respect the audience. Don't try not to write down. Try always to elevate your language. Look for the elegant or the just right word. Very often, I would, with writers, I say, look, here's a more elegant way of saying the same thing. But the difference between saying it in a more elegant way and just saying it is the line sometimes is memorable, as opposed to be just another line, you know. And actors respond to that. They love that, you know, when they can say something that's better than the ordinary. So try to achieve, always write in terms of respecting your audience, write the best you can. You need to develop as wide a knowledge of literature, of writing, of history, of philosophy, of religion, of science, of everything that the human mind is capable of. And the more you know, the more you can write about with more accuracy, with more truth, with more power, with more conviction. And so just keep on reading and read, and even when you're writing, keep on reading and reading and reading. The one danger for someone who wants to be creative, especially in television, is watching too much other television. A lot of people watch television to see what's successful, so that, oh, I know what's successful. What they do, they copy that. Oh, it's an echo of an echo of an echo. It's not original. It doesn't come from the mind, from inspiration. It's just, copying something that's already there. That doesn't go for motion pictures, because motion pictures are wider canvas. And if I can finish the Bonanza feature story, so after we agreed that I wouldn't write the script, I didn't want to write it, they hired 2 top writers. I will not mention their names. And all I did, I met them, I liked them very much, very bright, young, knew all the in-chatter and all that, seemed, with it. I asked them, do you know the show? Oh, sure, we love the show, And they proceeded to write a script about nasty people doing truly nasty, contemptible things to each other. The story begins with little Joe constructing a gallows to hang, guess who? His father. And then it goes downhill from there. I said, well, we wanted to have some conflict. I said, is this the only conflict you want? I mean, it's so ludicrous. Anyone who has seen the show will say, this is what aliens from a different planet wrote this? But from that premise, it was totally, totally absurd. So I expressed my feeling to Universal. I said, this is wrong. But it's such a wonderful script, Dave. How could you object to it? So I said, well, they gave me all the reasons why. So they said, well, look, what we'll do is we'll try to get a top director, and then you can express your thoughts to him. And at that point, if there's possible, we can change it a little bit. So I said, okay, what can I do? Once you sign an option, you lose control. And so they sent it to 7. This is dangerous ground, but anyway, it's the truth. 7 different top directors, and every one of them turned it down. Every one of them. Now it's a $50-60 million picture. Even then, now probably about $70-80 million. How does a top director who gets $4 to $5 million turn something down? So I asked, why did they turn it down? And they said, all the other commitments, or whatever. I said, but didn't they ever give a reason? Did anybody say they didn't like the script? No, nobody even mentioned the script. It's a good script. So I said, well, I'm sorry, I don't agree. And, well, we're calling about picking up the option. But you included that credo, and we don't want that. We want you to waive that. And I said, no way. What do you mean, no way? If you don't waive that, we won't pick up the option. I said, that's the best news I could ever hear. So they dropped it. One of the guys, one of the executives in the show, called me about a month later and said he would like to, he still has faith in the show. He thinks it'll be a wonderful movie, and he would like to continue trying to get it made, either Universal or some other studio. And he's a very nice chap. So I said, okay, but I want to keep tabs on what you, oh, no question about it. I said, the intent to use that script? He said, yes. He said, David, don't you understand? It's a wonderful script. I said, well, I don't know if I want you to do this, And he came to my house, and we're talking in my study. And just before he leaves, he says, one directed, I said, you must get a director who, at least the director knows the show, not just the writers. He said, well, as a matter of fact, one of the directors who turned it down said he knew Bonanza very much, and he loved the show. I said, oh, really? How do I find that? Why am I not surprised by it? How do I just find out about this? Who was that director? So he mentions his name, and he's a top director. Top, I mean, right on the very top. So I says, wow, I would like to meet this man, Could you check this, if that's possible? So he said, he lives up in Santa Barbara. I said, so we'll drive up to Santa Barbara and talk to him. So he calls this director in Santa Barbara, and tells him this, and said, no, 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 I don't want Mr. Dortort to drive up to Santa Barbara. He's one of my heroes. I grew up, my brothers and I grew up in Chicago watching that show. He said, I will drive down to Los Angeles to see him. Talk about changing. Naturally, I fell in love with the guy right away, and he's a wonderful director. And so he came to the house. I said, so I understand you read the old script. And he came with a young woman who's his director of programming, very bright. And they both spent like the next hour telling me how awful that script was, how they hated it, the old script, which is why he turned it down. And you know, imagine what the others thought, how stupid it was to say, this is Bonanza, little Joe's going to hang his own father? Whatever the reason, he told him a lie once. Wow, big deal. He finds out he told him a lie to protect him from some harm. So it wasn't that much of a lie anyway, it was just a father acting. But how could you, this is such a vicious kind of thing for a son to do to a father, you know, or any member of his family. So it goes on that, and I said, well, I'm sure that you have, I say to the director, you have some ideas how you want the show to go, the story to go. He said, no, no, he said, I wouldn't presume, how do you want the story to go? So he said, do you have anything in mind? So I tell him something that I have in mind. A great, great wrong that was perpetrated in this state of California and in the West to our Chinese population. Here's the story. To Right a Great Wrong, a story for Bonanza by David Dortort. And I want to register it. Now, that doesn't mean that I will write the screenplay, but at least there will be the basis for a very strong story here.
But if you were asked, would you write it now?
I would have to say no for the same reasons.
Okay.
I wouldn't trust myself to have that absolute high level of concentration that's so necessary. But what I will do is what I always would do. After the writer writes it and gets the credit for writing it, the screenplay, then I will go over it. And if there's anything that I feel is missing, particularly in terms of history, I don't want anyone to tell me you go from California right into Canada, you know, or something like that.
That Washington, Oregon thing.
Yeah. Forget it.
What would you be if you were not a writer?
Probably a teacher, because I love teaching too. You know, I taught not only UCLA, but I lectured at USC and schools all over the world, in Alberta, Canada, in Toronto, in Israel, at the University of Tel Aviv, which had the only film writing program there.
Well, it's the David Dortort program.
Yeah.
In the university, is it Judaism?
That's Judaism. Well, we did.
The David Dortort Writers Institute at the University of Judaism.
Yes, my wife and I endowed that because there aren't the enrollment or the people wishing to enroll in film writing courses far exceeds the capacity of all the universities, the UCLA, USC, NYU, Northwestern, you know, the major film writing schools. And there are so many more. And since I live in Los Angeles, and I felt that young writers, when I started to write, there was no way to turn as a screenwriter. There were no schools at all. There were private people who taught lessons, but there weren't any schools. Now, of course, it's a major subject in most curricula at most of the major schools. So we heard about this little University of Judaism here, and because I'm of that faith, and so is my wife, we believe in the philosophy of giving back, you know, helping. Writers Guild Foundation is such a wonderful organization, you know. We're so happy to be helping that. Okay, we'll help you start this by endowing what we call the Dortort Writers Institute. And we've had some wonderful writers there, Hollywood people, non-Hollywood people, novelists, because not just screenwriting, writing. What a writer should do is write, but also he should help other writers, if he can.
Yeah.
And that's the greatness of the Writers Guild and the Writers Guild Foundation.
That's so true. That's a great note to stop on, I think.
I think so too.